100 sleepy facts about ancient Mesopotamia. Hello there, and welcome to history to fall asleep. Tonight, we are traveling into a land of slow rivers, mud brick cities, moonlit temples, and tablets pressed with tiny wedges. We are going to ancient Mesopotamia. This was not one country, one people, or one short chapter of history. It was a long and changing world that grew between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Over thousands of years, farmers, boat builders, scribes, merchants, priests, craft workers, queens, kings, and children learned how to live in a landscape that could be generous one season and dangerous the next. They watched the rivers rise. They cut canals through the earth. They raised temples above the plain. They marked debts, deliveries, poems and prayers into soft clay. They looked at the moon and stars, not only with wonder, but with patient attention. Some of their cities became ruins long ago. Some of their languages fell silent. Yet the people of Mesopotamia left behind an extraordinary amount of their everyday thinking. A note asking for supplies, a contract for land, a lesson copied by a student, a hymn to a goddess, a list of sheep, a story about a king who feared death. Tonight, there is no need to remember every date or every name. You may simply let the names drift past like small boats on dark water. Before we begin, thank you for spending this quiet time here. If these gentle journeys help you settle into the evening, you can support history to fall asleep by subscribing or leaving a kind comment for another listener to find. But for now, let the day grow distant. Relax your shoulders, let your breathing become unhurried, and imagine a warm night on the plain of southern Iraq, thousands of years ago. A river is moving in the darkness. Reeds whisper along its banks. Somewhere in a city of clay, a lamp still burns beside a tablet that has not yet dried. Let us begin. Fact 1. Mesopotamia was a name for a region, not a single ancient nation. The word Mesopotamia comes from Greek words meaning wheat between the rivers. It describes the broad land associated with the Tigris and Euphrates, much of it in modern Iraq with connected areas in northeastern Syria and southeastern Turkey. Ancient people did not all wake up and call themselves Mesopotamians. They belonged to cities, kingdoms, languages, families, and gods with their own names. At different times, the south was known as Sumer or Babylonia. The center was linked with Akkad. The north became associated with Assyria. These regions shared many customs, but they were never identical. Their accents, rulers, local gods, and political rivalries could differ greatly. So tonight, it may help to picture Mesopotamia as a wide historical stage. The rivers formed the setting. Generations of different people entered, built, argued, traded, prayed, wrote, and eventually left their layers beneath the soil. Fact 2. The Tigris and Euphrates gave life, but they could also bring trouble. It is easy to imagine rivers as calm blue lines on a map. In ancient Mesopotamia, they were more like powerful neighbors. Their water made farming possible in a hot and often dry land. Yet their floods were not always gentle or predictable. A rising river could nourish a field, break a canal bank, swamp a house, or carry away a boat. People, therefore, had to pay attention to water every year. They opened channels, cleared silt, strengthened embankments, and watched for changes in the flow. This work was not glamorous. It was muddy, repetitive, and essential. A city could not eat because someone had carved a beautiful statue. It ate because fields received water at the right time. The rivers also joined distant places. Boats moved grain, reeds, wood, wool, clay, and people. A river could be a road, a boundary, a source of danger, and a promise of survival. Sometimes all in the same week. Fact 3. Southern Mesopotamia had little stone and wood, so people learned to build with earth. In many ancient cities, stone monuments survive because stone resists weather. Southern Mesopotamia was different. The flat alluvial plain had rich mud, but relatively little building stone and few large forests. That limitation shaped the entire look of its cities. Builders mixed mud with straw, pressed it into molds, dried the bricks in the sun, and used them to make houses, walls, temples, and platforms. Important buildings could be faced with tougher baked bricks. Bitumen, a natural tar-like substance, helped protect some parts from water. Mud brick was practical, warm, and available almost everywhere. It also needed constant care. Rain and wind could slowly soften it back toward the earth. That is one reason many ancient Mesopotamian cities now appear as low hills rather than complete stone streets. Their walls did not vanish without a trace. They returned little by little to the material from which they were made. Fact 4. The ancient coastline was not where it is today. When we look at a modern map, the Persian Gulf seems far from some famous Sumerian cities. But rivers carry mud, sand, and silt. Over very long periods, they can change coastlines and create new land. In antiquity, southern Mesopotamia was connected to a marshy delta landscape, and some cities that now seem inland were much closer to waters leading toward the Gulf. This matters because early urban life was not only a story of dry fields and desert edges. It was also a story of wetlands, fishing grounds, reed beds, canals, and boats. The southern plain had an unusual mixture of hot, arid land and living water. Imagine standing near an ancient settlement at dusk. You might smell damp reeds as well as dust. You might hear frogs, birds, and the creak of boats. Mesopotamia was never simply a brown blank space between two blue rivers. It was a human-made and water-shaped environment, always changing at the edges. Fact 5. Sumer was home to some of the oldest known cities in the world. In the southern part of Mesopotamia, a region later called Sumer became the setting for cities such as Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu, Nippur, and Umma. These were not just large villages. They developed dense populations, temples, workshops, administrators, neighborhoods, and systems for gathering and redistributing food. Their growth was gradual. There was no single morning when a person opened a door and announced that civilization had begun. Instead, fields became more organized. Stores of grain became larger. Tasks became more specialized. Leaders and temple institutions coordinated labor. Records became useful. Settlements expanded. The cities of Sumer were often independent city-states. Each had its own ruler and patron deity, and each could compete with the next. A traveler moving from one city to another might cross a short distance but enter a different political world. The land was flat, yet the map of power could be surprisingly crowded. Fact 6. Uruk became a model for early city life. Uruk was one of the great early cities of southern Mesopotamia. By the late 4th millennium BCE, it had grown into a place of remarkable scale for its time. It had temple districts, busy craft activity, food storage, administration, and some of the earliest written records we know. The city was strongly connected to agriculture. Grain and other goods moved into large institutions and were processed or redistributed. That made record keeping important. If workers received rations, someone needed to remember how much barley, beer, or wool had been given out. If a temple received animals, someone needed to count them. Uruk also became famous in later stories as the city of Gilgamesh. Whether the legendary king can be linked securely to one historical person is uncertain. But the city itself was very real. Its long life gave later generations a place onto which they could project memories of mighty walls, gods, heroes, and the distant beginning of urban life. Fact 7. A Mesopotamian city-state was both a place and a small political universe. A city-state was not simply a city with houses inside it. It usually included surrounding fields, canals, villages, grazing land, shrines, and people who depended on the city's institutions. The city center might hold major temples, storage areas, workshops, markets, official buildings, and defenses. Beyond it lay the food-producing countryside. The ruler of one city-state might call himself king, governor, or a title that meant something closer to a chief steward of the city's god. His authority was often tied to war, irrigation, construction, justice, and religious duty. If canals failed or enemies attacked, people expected leadership to matter. Yet, city life was never just the story of rulers. It depended on farmers, brewers, herders, boat crews, potters, weavers, scribes, laborers, and families. A city-state was a great many ordinary routines gathered under one skyline, usually with a temple rising above the mud-brick roofs. Fact 8. Mesopotamian temples were more than places for prayer. Temples were sacred spaces, but they could also be major economic and social institutions. They received offerings, held land, employed workers, managed storage, supported rituals, and helped organize the movement of grain, animals, textiles, and other goods. In some periods, a temple could feel almost like a combination of sanctuary, warehouse, workshop, and office. People believed that a city belonged in a special way to its patron god or goddess. The temple was the god's household on earth. Priests and other workers cared for the divine image, prepared food and drink offerings, maintained buildings, and carried out ceremonies according to strict rhythms. This way of thinking made practical work feel meaningful. Repairing a canal, delivering grain, or weaving cloth for a temple could connect daily labor to the well-being of the city. The gods were not far away, in an abstract heaven. They were imagined as present in the ordered life of the community, receiving attention through real human hands. Fact 9. Ziggurats were raised temple platforms, not tombs. A ziggurat was a towering, stepped structure built of mud brick and baked brick. It supported a temple at or near its summit. From far across the flat plain, it would have stood out like an artificial mountain, guiding travelers toward the city. The best-known surviving example is the ziggurat at built around 2100 BCE by King Namu for Nana, the moon god of the city. Its core was made of mud brick, protected by a tougher outer layer. Drains and openings helped manage rainwater and moisture, because even a massive structure made of earth had to contend with the weather. A ziggurat was not designed as a giant grave. It was a high, sacred platform linking the city visually with its patron deity. It also declared organization and resources. To build one required planning, labor, food for workers, technical knowledge, and a ruler or institution powerful enough to coordinate all of it. Fact 10. Reeds were one of the quiet foundations of Mesopotamian life. When people think of ancient Mesopotamia, they may imagine kings in carved stone or scribes with clay tablets. But reeds were just as important in daily life. They grew in wet areas along rivers and marshes, and they could be woven, tied, shaped, or used as simple tools. Reeds became mats, baskets, roofing material, fences, boat parts, and sometimes even writing tools. A reed stylus pressed wedge-shaped marks into damp clay. The humble plant that rustled beside canals also helped to create script through which Mesopotamians recorded their thoughts. Reed boats and reed bundles appear in ancient imagery and stories. They remind us that Mesopotamian ingenuity often began with what was close at hand. In a land without abundant timber, a flexible water plant could become shelter, transport, writing equipment, and everyday furniture. Ancient civilization did not rise from marble alone. In Mesopotamia, it also rose from mud, straw, water, and reeds. Fact 11. Barley was one of the most important crops in the ancient south. Barley grew well in the irrigated fields of southern Mesopotamia and became central to food, drink, rations, taxes, and trade. It could be ground into flour, baked into bread, fermented into beer, counted in a councid, and stored for difficult times. A tablet recording barley was never only about barley. It might also be about labor, authority, weather, debt, or survival. If a field produced enough, a household or temple could feed people, pay workers, and prepare for the future. If it failed, the consequences could spread through an entire neighborhood. Farmers also cultivated wheat, vegetables, flax, fruit, and other crops where conditions allowed. But barley often appears again and again in the written record because it was so useful and so measurable. In the soft repetition of Mesopotamian administration. Barley became a kind of language, a number on a tablet that described whether life was running smoothly. Fact 12. Date palms made the hot south more livable. The date palm was a generous tree in an unforgiving climate. It offered sweet fruit, shade, fiber, wood, and materials that could be used in many ordinary tasks. In gardens and groves, palms created cooler pockets of space beneath their leaves. Their height also allowed layers of cultivation. Taller palms provided shade, while smaller plants could grow below them. This did not remove the difficulty of farming in a hot land, but it helped people make better use of limited water and ground. Dates could be eaten fresh or dried, turned into syrup, and carried on journeys. Palm trunks and fronds could be used for construction and craft work. Ancient people did not separate nature from economy as neatly as modern categories sometimes do. A date palm was food, shade, building material, trade good, and part of the familiar scenery of home. At night, a grove of palms beside a canal must have felt like a small island of darkness and rustling leaves in a bright open plain. Fact 13. Irrigation made large settlements possible, but it demanded constant cooperation. Southern Mesopotamia did not receive enough regular rainfall for easy farming in many areas. The solution was irrigation. People guided river water into canals and ditches, then toward fields. This allowed food production on a scale that could support towns and cities. But irrigation was never a one-time invention. It was a long relationship with mud and water. Channels filled with silt. Banks broke. Neighbors argued over access. Floods damaged fields. Workers had to clean, deepen, repair, and monitor the system again and again. Because water touched so many parts of life, it also touched politics. A ruler who claimed to build a canal was making a meaningful promise. A city that maintained waterworks could prosper. A community that failed to coordinate might face hunger. This is one reason Mesopotamian civilization often feels so practical beneath its grand myths. Even the largest temples and palaces depended on small, recurring acts. Clearing weeds, carrying baskets of mud, watching a water gate, and making sure the river reached the grain. Fact 14. Irrigation could leave salt behind in the soil. Water brings life to a dry field, but in a hot climate, it can also create a problem. When irrigation water evaporates, some salts may remain in the soil. Over long periods, especially where drainage is poor, salt can make certain crops harder to grow. Ancient Mesopotamian farmers were not unaware of their landscape. Written records and changing crop patterns suggest that people responded to difficult conditions in different ways. Barley, for example, can tolerate more salt than wheat, and it became especially important in the south. The lesson is calm but important. Civilization was not a simple victory over nature. It was a continuous negotiation. Human beings shaped canals and fields, but rivers, heat, salt, wind, and changing political fortunes shaped them in return. The great cities of Mesopotamia were astonishing achievements. They were also delicate. Their wealth depended on environmental systems that required attention every season. A forgotten channel or exhausted field could be as serious as an enemy army. Fact 15. Writing in Mesopotamia began with practical needs. The earliest known writing from southern Mesopotamia was not a grand poem or a royal speech. Much of it seems to have been connected with administration. Goods, workers, animals, rations, and a storage. People had reached a point where memory alone was no longer enough for large institutions. At first, signs could be more picture-like. Over time, they became more abstract and more flexible. A mark could represent an object, a word, a sound, or an idea, depending on context. That flexibility made it possible to record much more than accounts. The first scribes may have been solving simple problems. How many jars arrived? Which worker received grain? What belongs to the temple? Yet those small solutions opened a door. Once writing existed, human voices could remain in a physical form after the speaker was gone. A city's storehouse needed records. Centuries later, the same writing system carried love songs, myths, mathematical tables, medical texts, and letters from homesick people far from home. Fact 16. Cuneiform means wedge-shaped, and it was made by pressing, not drawing. The writing system used across much of ancient Mesopotamia is called cuneiform, from a word connected with wedges. The signs were made by pressing the cut edge of a stylus into damp clay. Each press left a small triangular or wedge-like mark. A scribe did not paint a line across a page. Instead, the scribe arranged many separate impressions in patterns. The result can look mysterious at first, like tiny bird tracks or stars, scattered across a tablet. But to trained readers, the signs carried language, numbers, names, and ideas. Clay was an ideal material for a river valley. It was abundant, easy to shape, and durable once dried or fired. A tablet could fit in one hand, be stored in a basket, or sealed inside a clay envelope. It could travel downriver, survive in a ruined building, and wait silently for thousands of years. Fact 17. Cuneiform was used for many languages, not only Sumerian. Sumerian was one of the earliest languages written in cuneiform, but the script did not belong to only one people. Over more than 3,000 years, cuneiform was adapted to write Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and several other languages of the ancient Near East. This is a little like using the same alphabet to write English, Spanish, French, and many other languages today. The signs could be borrowed, adjusted, and taught across borders. A script could outlive a language, just as Sumerian remained important in learned after religious settings. Even ordinary spoken language of must being the ordinaries and spoken of most people. The long life of cuneiform is one of the reasons Mesopotamia feels so close to us. We do not have only monuments. We have records of administration, literature, science, law, and private life written across generations. A writing system became a bridge carrying knowledge from one kingdom into the next. Fact 18. Clay tablets sometimes survived because fire accidentally baked them. The book. Many tablets were meant simply to dry in the sun. They were not always fired in a kiln. But when buildings burned during war, disaster, or abandonment, intense heat could harden the clay permanently. This is one of history's strange reversals. A fire that destroyed a palace or archive could also preserve the words stored inside it. Wood, cloth, and many other materials might disappear. A tablet could come out of the disaster tougher than before. Archaeologists have found thousands of tablets in the remains of ancient cities. Some are broken, some are worn, and some are still astonishingly clear. Their survival is uneven, of course. We do not possess every voice from Mesopotamia. We often have what happened to be written down, stored, buried, and preserved by chance. Still, the thought is soothing. A small piece of clay, once held by a busy scribe, could rest beneath a collapsed wall for millennia and still carry a message into the modern world. Fact 19. Cylinder. Seals were small objects with enormous importance. A cylinder seal was a small carved stone, usually pierced so it could be worn on a string. When rolled across wet clay, it left a continuous image. The image might show gods, rituals, or a person standing before a divine figure. It could also include names and titles. In practical terms, a seal could function like a signature, a mark of identity, or a way of securing a container or document. If clay on a door, jar, basket, or tablet bore the right seal impression, people could see who had authorized it. But cylinder seals were also personal works of art. They traveled with their owners, touched the body, and expressed status or belief. A tiny stone could contain a whole miniature scene, carefully cut in reverse, so that the clay impression would appear correctly. Imagine a merchant or official rolling a seal across fresh clay. In one smooth movement, an image became evidence. Art, trust, bureaucracy, and personal identity all met in a line no wider than a finger. Fact 20. Scribes trained for years because writing was difficult. Cuneiform was not an easy script to master. It involved many signs, changing meanings, numbers, and conventions. A scribe needed patience, memory, and the ability to copy accurately. Schools taught students through repetition. They wrote lists of words, animals, plants, gods, professions, and signs. This may sound dry, but such lists were a kind of ancient mental gymnasium. Before a student could write a beautiful hymn or complex contract, the student had to recognize and reproduce a large store of learned knowledge. Scribes were useful in temples, palaces, courts, workshops, trade, networks, and households with businesses to manage. They could record deliveries, calculate rations, write letters, and preserve traditions. In a world where not everyone could read and write, literacy carried real power. Yet, the surviving school exercises also show something familiar. Students made mistakes. Teachers corrected them. Young people repeated lines until the shapes became steady beneath the stylus. Across 4,000 years, the sound of a learner practicing remains easy to imagine. Fact 21. Mesopotamian records can make ordinary work visible. Royal inscriptions tell us about victories, buildings, and gods. But everyday tablets tell another kind of story. They list deliveries of grain, animals counted at a gate, workers assigned to tasks, cloth distributed to weavers, or fields measured after harvest. At first glance, these records can feel almost too ordinary. A list of sheep is not as dramatic as an epic. Yet ordinary records are precious because they reveal the machinery of daily life. They show that cities did not run on heroic speeches. They ran on inventory, schedules, storage, labor, and people noticing what had arrived and what was missing. A tablet may preserve the name of a worker who never appeared in any monument. It may tell us that a household expected beer, that a shepherd was responsible for animals, or that someone owed a small quantity of silver. These quiet details are part of the charm of Mesopotamia. The ancient world was not only grand, it was also organized around the same daily question people still ask. What needs to be done tomorrow? Fact 22. Bread and beer were everyday parts of life. Grain was not only stored and counted, it was eaten and drunk in many forms. Bread was a basic food, while beer, often made from barley, was a familiar drink. In a world where water quality could vary, fermented beverages could be important and practical as well as social. Beer in ancient Mesopotamia was not necessarily like the clear bottled drink many people know today. It could be thicker and cloudier, and it was sometimes consumed through straws, especially when sediment collected at the bottom of a vessel. Workers might receive rations that included grain or beer. Temples prepared food and drink offerings for gods. Households made meals around the rhythms of farming and storage. The ordinary act of eating was deeply connected to the economy of fields and canals. So, when a tablet records barley, it may lead us toward a simple evening meal. Flat bread, a bowl of stew, dates perhaps, and a vessel of beer shared in a courtyard as daylight fades from the mud brick walls. Fact 23. Wool was one of Mesopotamia's major industries. Sheep were valuable not only for meat and milk, but for wool. Large institutions could manage flocks and organize the work of cleaning, spinning, dyeing, weaving, and distributing textiles. Cloth was useful at home, offered in temples, worn as status, and traded beyond the region. Textile production involved skilled labor. Spinners and weavers worked with fibers transformed into thread through long, careful processes. Some records mention groups of workers, their rations, their output, and the materials assigned to them. Because textiles do not survive as easily as clay or stone, it is easy to forget how important they were. Yet cloth was one of the great products of ancient Mesopotamia. A woven garment could carry labor from a field, a flock, a workshop, and a household all at once. At night, after the noise of an official storehouse had quieted, a person might still sit near a lamp, turning fibers between patient fingers. Civilizations are remembered for monuments. They are also held together by thread. Fact 24. Mesopotamians traded far beyond the river valleys. The flat plains of Mesopotamia were fertile, but they did not contain every material people wanted. Good timber, stone, metals, and certain precious stones often came from elsewhere. This encouraged long-distance trade by river, overland routes, and sea. Texts mention places such as Dilmun, usually associated with the Gulf region, Magan, linked with Oman, and Meluha, often connected with the Indus Valley. Merchants and officials sought copper, wood, stone, ivory, shells, and rare materials that could not simply be dug from the local mud. Lapis lazuli, with its deep blue color, traveled from far to the east, probably from sources in what is now Afghanistan. Its journey into Mesopotamian jewelry and art was a long one. Trade was not an extra decoration on city life. It was part of how cities worked. A carved bead, a metal tool, or a wooden door may have carried the story of many landscapes before reaching a Mesopotamian home. Fact 25. Rivers and the Gulf made boats essential. In a land threaded with waterways, boats were practical. They moved grain, animals, people, building materials, and trade goods more easily than carts could travel across soft or uneven ground. Riverboats linked fields to cities, and cities to one another. Some boats were made from wood where wood was available. Others could use reed bundles, frames, skins, or bitumen for waterproofing. The details changed with time, place, and purpose. What mattered was the ability to move across water. The Euphrates and Tigris were not only rivers to cross. They were routes through a world of settlements. A boat crew could carry messages, taxes, food, officials, pilgrims, or merchants. The sound of poles, paddles, and water against a hull must have been part of the everyday soundscape of Mesopotamian life. For a sleepy mind, it is easy to picture a low cargo boat at sunset, sliding between reed banks. Clay jars sit inside. A heron rises from the water. Ahead, the outline of a temple tower darkens against the sky. Fact 26. Mesopotamian people used the wheel, but the wheel was not the single magic invention of civilization. Wheeled vehicles appear in the ancient Near East in the 4th millennium BCE, and the potter's wheel also changed some kinds of craft production. But the story is not as simple as one brilliant person inventing a wheel and suddenly transforming everything. A wheel needs roads or firm ground. It needs wood, tools, animals to pull a cart, and people who can repair it. In wet or muddy parts of southern Mesopotamia, boats could still be more useful than wagons. A river barge could carry a heavy load where a cart might sink. The wheel mattered because it became part of a larger system of movement and work. It helped carry materials, supported pottery production, and changed the possibilities of transport in some settings. But like irrigation and writing, it worked best when many other parts of society were already in place. Ancient Mesopotamia was full of such systems. No one invention did everything alone. Cities grew through the patient connection of fields, animals, tools, water, roads, records, and human cooperation. Fact 27. Plows helped turn soil and organize farming on a larger scale. early farmers did not have modern tractors or metal machinery. They used simple tools, animal power, and knowledge of the seasons. Over time, plows made it easier to open and prepare soil, especially in fields large enough to feed growing populations. A plow was not just a piece of wood dragged through earth. It represented a relationship between people, animals, fields, and harvests. Oxen or other draft animals could provide strength. Farmers guided the whir, watched the water, and waited for growth. In Mesopotamian art and writing, agriculture appears again and again because it formed the base of urban life. The city might be filled with scribes and merchants, but its food began in the countryside. A good harvest supported temples, armies, workshops, and families. A poor harvest made every other plan harder. There is something gentle in this old rhythm. Before a tablet was written, or a temple ceremony began, someone had to walk behind a plough in the open air, looking over a field that would decide much of the year ahead. Fact 28. City walls were reminders. Mesopotamian cities could be rivals. The famous cities of Sumer were often close enough to compete for land, water, trade, and honor. Their rulers built walls, led armies, and carved inscriptions that praised victories over neighbors. The flat plain made boundaries important, especially where canals and fields were involved. Some conflicts could last for generations. A dispute over a strip of land or the course of water might become part of a city's political memory. Rulers wanted to appear strong, not only before enemies, but before their own people and gods. Walls served several purposes. They could defend a population, control entry, mark prestige, and make a city visible from a distance. The ancient city of Uruk, for example, later became famous in stories for its great walls. Yet walls could not separate everything. Traders, migrants, messengers, and ideas kept moving. Rival cities shared many customs even while they fought. The same writing, gods, grain, and techniques crossed the political lines. In Mesopotamia, competition and connection often traveled side by side. Fact 29. The royal cemetery of revealed a world of extraordinary craft. At the ancient city of archaeologists uncovered a cemetery containing rich burials from the early 3rd millennium BCE. Some graves held objects made of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, shell, wood, and other valuable materials. The finds showed a level of craft skill that still feels astonishing. There were elaborate headdresses, musical instruments, drinking vessels, weapons, and decorated objects. The materials had come from far away, which reveals the reach of trade networks, as well as the power of elite households. The burials also raise difficult questions. Some tombs contained the remains of many people, perhaps attendants or retainers, who died as part of funerary rituals. Archaeologists continue to study how and why these deaths occurred. It is a reminder that beauty in the past can exist beside hierarchy and suffering. Still, the craftsmanship is remarkable. A small piece of gold or blue stone can tell us about miners, merchants, sailors, carvers, and artists across a whole region. The royal graves of Ur are not only treasure stories, they are maps of a complicated human world. Fact 30. The standard of Ur may not have been a standard at all. One of the most famous objects from Ur is often called the standard of Ur. It is a wooden box-like object decorated with tiny pieces of shell, red limestone, and lapis lazuli. Nobody knows exactly what it was used for. It may have been part of an instrument, a container, or something ceremonial. Its name is less certain than its images. One side shows scenes often interpreted as war. Chariots, soldiers, prisoners, and a ruler. The other shows scenes of peace or celebration, animals being brought, food and drink, musicians, and a banquet. The object is valuable because it gives us a visual story, not just words. It suggests how people wanted to represent power, labor, victory, and abundance. But it also teaches a useful lesson about archaeology. And sometimes an object survives while its original explanation does not. The past is not a finished book. It is a collection of fragments. We look carefully, compare evidence, and admit what remains unknown. That uncertainty can be peaceful too. It leaves a little room for the ancient object to keep its secret. Fact 31. Music was part of ceremony, work, memory, and grief. The graves of Ur included beautiful lyres, some decorated with animal figures and precious materials. These instruments tell us that music had an important place in Mesopotamian life. Texts also mention singers, musicians, hymns, and ritual performances. Music could accompany worship, royal events, mourning, celebrations, and stories. A song could preserve a myth, praise a god, or give shape to a communal feeling. Even though we do not know exactly how all ancient melodies sounded, instruments and texts suggest that music was woven into the rhythm of life. A lyre does not survive as sound. It survives as wood, metal, shell, or an image. Yet it invites imagination. Picture a musician sitting in a temple courtyard, plucking strings, while lamps flicker. The notes might have drifted upward toward a temple terrace, blending with the sound of voices and the warm night air. Across time, music remains one of the simplest ways people turn a gathering into something remembered. Fact 32. Enheduanna is the earliest known author whose name we know. Enheduanna lived in the Akkadian period and served as a high priestess connected with the moon god at Ur. She is associated with hymns and literary compositions, including powerful works addressed to the goddess Inanna. Her name appears in connection with these writings, making her the earliest known named author in world literature. This matters because ancient writing is often anonymous. We know a king commissioned a building. We know a scribe copied a tablet. But the personal identity of an author can disappear. Enheduanna stands out because tradition preserved her name and role. Her work also reminds us that women in Mesopotamia could occupy significant religious and economic positions, although opportunities varied greatly by time, class, city, and family. We should not imagine a single simple rule for all women across 3,000 years of history. In the quiet world of tablets, Enheduanna's name still has presence. A voice from more than 4,000 years ago remains attached to words of praise, fear, devotion, and cosmic order. Fact 33. Mesopotamian religion was local, crowded, and deeply connected to daily life. Mesopotamians honored many gods and goddesses. Different cities had special relationships with particular deities, while some divine figures were known across a wider region. The religious world was not a neat chart with one unchanging list. Names, roles, and stories could shift across time and place. An, or Anu, was linked with the sky. Enlil was a powerful god associated with wind and authority. Enki, later called Ea, was connected with fresh water, wisdom, and craft. Nana or Sin was the moon god. Utu or Shamash was linked with the sun and justice. Inanna or Ishtar had rich and complex connections with love, war, power, and the planet Venus. People did not separate religion from ordinary life in the modern way. The gods could be involved in harvests, health, contracts, travel, kingship, weather, and family concerns. A person might make an offering, consult an omen, wear an amulet, or recite a prayer as part of facing uncertainty. Fact 34. Inanna and Ishtar were goddesses of striking contrasts. In Sumerian tradition, Inanna was a major goddess. In later Akkadian-speaking traditions, a closely connected figure was known as Ishtar. She could be associated with love, sexuality, fertility, battle, royal power, storms of emotion, and the bright appearance of Venus in the sky. Now, these contrasts may seem surprising, but they reveal something important about ancient religion. Gods were not always gentle symbols with one simple job. They could represent forces that human beings found powerful and unpredictable. Love could overturn a household. War could change a kingdom. Venus could appear beautiful at dawn and unsettling at dusk. Stories about Inanna show a figure who descends into the underworld, seeks power, faces loss, and returns. Other hymns praise her as fierce and radiant. She could be protective, dangerous, desired, and feared. For listeners drifting towards sleep, she is one of Mesopotamia's most vivid presences, a goddess imagined. In the brightness of a star, the violence of battle, and the restless intensity of human longing. Fact 35. The gods were thought to need care, just as important households did. In Mesopotamian temples, divine statues were treated with great seriousness. The god's image was not merely a decoration. Through ritual, it was understood as a living focus of the deity's presence. Priests and temple staff provided food, drink, clothing, music, processions, and careful attention. This does not mean ancient people believed a statue was simply a person made of stone or wood. Their religious ideas were more layered than that. But the image allowed a relationship between the divine and the city to be poisoned, to take a visible form. A god could be honored with elaborate garments, precious objects, perfumes, and meals. Temple festivals might bring a divine image out into streets or onto a boat. The city's collective life gathered around those sacred movements. This practice can seem distant at first, Yet it began with a familiar human idea. Care shows respect. In Mesopotamia, a community cared for its gods through regular acts of service, and in return hoped for protection, stability, rain, justice, or the continued life of the city. Fact 36. The Epic of Gilgamesh asks a question that still feels familiar. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the most famous literary work from ancient Mesopotamia. It tells of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, their adventures, Enkidu's death and Gilgamesh's desperate search for a way to escape mortality. The epic is not a simple bedtime tale. It contains danger, grief, pride, loss, and wonder. Yet at its center is a question that remains deeply human. What do we do when we understand that we cannot live forever? Gilgamesh travels far, meets a survivor of a great flood, and seeks secret knowledge. In the end, he does not become immortal, but he returns with a changed understanding of the limits and meaning of a human life. The story has survived in Sumerian and Akkadian forms, copied and revised across centuries. Its endurance is fitting. A poem about mortality has outlived the kingdoms that first listened to it. Even now it invites us to rest our minds beside an ancient river and wonder what a life is for. Fact 37. Mesopotamian flood stories were older than the final version of Gilgamesh. Within the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim, a man who survived a devastating flood after receiving divine warning. The flood episode has similarities to later flood traditions known elsewhere, but it also belongs to older Mesopotamian storytelling. Earlier Sumerian and Akkadian texts contain related flood narratives. The details change, the names change, but the basic image remains powerful. Water rising beyond ordinary limits, a chosen survivor, a boat, animals or living things preserved, and a new beginning after destruction. For people living beside unpredictable rivers, flood was not an abstract idea. It was a force they understood in practical terms. Too much water could ruin fields, walls, and homes. The myth took that real fear and expanded it to the scale of the whole world. But these stories are not only about disaster. They are also about warning, endurance, memory, and the fragile line between human plans and the larger forces of nature. Fact 38. Mesopotamians often imagined the afterlife as a shadowy place. Many Mesopotamian texts describe the land of the dead as a dark underworld. It was not usually imagined as a bright paradise where everyone received easy reward. The dead could be thought of as continuing in a dim, distant realm beneath the earth. This did not mean people had no hope or no funeral customs. Families cared for the dead, remembered ancestors, and performed rites. Proper burial and offerings mattered. The relationship between living and dead remained important. But the general mood of the underworld in many stories is sober. It reflects a culture that did not always promise escape from death. This may be one reason the Epic of Gilgamesh feels so direct. Its hero is not comforted by a simple promise. He has to face the reality that human life is temporary. There is something strangely calming in that ancient honesty. The Mesopotamians looked at the night, the grave, and the passing of time without pretending that every mystery had an easy answer. They made stories not to remove mortality, but to live beside it. Fact 39. Divination was a way of searching for meaning in uncertainty. Mesopotamian people lived in a world of changing rivers, disease, war, weather, and political danger. They often believed that the gods sent signs through the natural world. Divination was the practice of reading those signs. Some specialists examined the livers of sacrificed animals. Others watched the sky, recorded unusual events, interpreted dreams, or noticed patterns in births, weather, and daily accidents. To modern eyes, some of these methods may seem unfamiliar or unconvincing. But in their own world, they were serious attempts to make uncertainty manageable. Divination was not necessarily a replacement for practical action. A ruler might consult omens before a campaign, while also gathering troops and supplies. A family might seek ritual protection, while also calling for medical help. The desire beneath it is easy to recognize. When life feels uncertain, people want clues. They want to know whether danger is coming and whether a decision is wise. Mesopotamian divination gave structure to that longing, turning attention itself into a ritual practice. Fact 40. Watching the sky became a long-term science. Mesopotamian scholars observed the moon, planets, stars, eclipses, and seasonal changes with great care. Over centuries, they recorded patterns and built bodies of knowledge that later Babylonian astronomers developed to a very high level. At first, sky watching was closely connected to omens. An eclipse or unusual planetary event might be interpreted as a sign for a king or city. But repeated observation also encouraged measurement. If a pattern appeared again and again, it could be recorded, compared, and anticipated. This patient attention helped produce sophisticated astronomical texts. Babylonian scholars calculated and predicted certain celestial events with methods that still impress historians of science. Their work became part of a larger legacy that influenced later traditions. Imagine a scribe on a warm roof at night, looking upward over the city. Below are dark courtyards, sleeping animals, and slow canals. Above are lights moving on schedules no ruler can command. The sky offered both mystery and order, and Mesopotamian observers learned to look for both. Fact 41. Mesopotamian mathematics often used a number system based on 60. Many people today count in tens, probably because we have 10 fingers. Mesopotamian scholars also used tens, but they developed a powerful system based largely on 60. This is called a sexagesimal system. That old habit still touches modern life. 60 minutes make an hour. 60 seconds make a minute. A circle is divided into 360 degrees. These are not direct copies of every ancient Mesopotamian practice, but they preserve the usefulness of counting by 60. Why 60? It has many divisors. It can be divided evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. That makes it convenient for fractions, trade, surveying, and calculation. copied multiplication tables, and practical problems involving fields, bricks, wages, and containers. Mathematics was not only abstract, it helped organize a world of canals, rations, taxes, and construction. A clay tablet full of numbers may look quiet and dry, yet behind it is a lively world of people measuring land, sharing grain, setting prices, and trying to make the complicated parts of city life add up. Fact 42. Babylonian mathematics could handle surprisingly complex problems. Later, Mesopotamian scholars, especially in Babylonian periods, developed methods for solving numerical problems that can feel remarkably advanced. Tablets preserve tables, geometric calculations, and problems involving areas, lengths, and quantities. They did not write mathematics exactly as modern students do. Their symbols, language, and teaching methods were different. But they could work with multiplication, division, reciprocals, squares, and sophisticated numerical relationships. Some tablets seem to come from school settings, where students practiced standard problem types. Practical needs helped shape this knowledge. Measuring a field, calculating the volume of a brick structure, or dividing an inheritance all required careful arithmetic. Yet, once a mathematical tradition exists, people can also explore patterns for their own intellectual satisfaction. This is another lesson from Mesopotamia. Ancient people were not merely struggling to survive from harvest to harvest. Many were also thinking deeply, teaching methods, correcting calculations, and preserving knowledge. Under the broad night sky, beside canals and temples, numbers became another way to describe the order of the world. Fact 43. Law in Mesopotamia was written, argued, witnessed, and remembered. The Code of Hammurabi is famous, but it was not the beginning or the whole of Mesopotamian law. Earlier rulers issued legal collections, and many surviving tablets show contracts, lawsuits, witnesses, oaths, sales, loans, marriages, adoptions, and disputes. Written law did not mean everyone was equal before it. Status mattered greatly. Men and women, free people and enslaved people, elites and laborers could face different rules and penalties. Still, the presence of written contracts and court records shows that people valued proof, procedure, and memory. A transaction might be witnessed by several people and recorded on a tablet. A clay envelope could cover the text beneath with seal impressions on the outside. If someone later challenged the agreement, the document could be opened and examined. This is very human. People then, as now, worried about ownership, promises, boundaries, debts, and trust. The tools were different, but the desire for evidence was familiar. A small tablet could hold the shape of an agreement long after the people who made it had gone. Fact 44. Hammurabi's famous code was a collection of judgments, not a modern law book. Hammurabi ruled Babylon in the 18th century BCE. A large basalt stele associated with him contains nearly 300 legal judgments dealing with family, property, trade, labor, injury, and other matters. It is one of the best-known documents from the ancient world. People often call it a code, but it is not a modern book of laws arranged like a national statute manual. It presents conditional cases. If this happens, then this is the judgment or penalty. It also includes a long introduction and conclusion praising Hammurabi as a king who established justice. The text is impressive, but it should not be treated as a perfect photograph of every courtroom. Real cases could be more complicated. Local practice, witnesses, officials, and social rank mattered. The stele was also royal messaging. It showed the king as a protector of order. Even so, it gives us a striking window into concerns that filled ordinary life. Houses, fields, wages, loans, family conflict, broken agreements, and the hope that a dispute could be settled. Fact 45. Mesopotamian society was unequal, and ancient texts do not hide that fact. Cities required many kinds of labor, but power and wealth were not spread evenly. Kings, high officials, priests, merchants, landholders, soldiers, craft workers, farmers, debtors, and enslaved people lived very different lives. Legal texts often distinguish between social categories. Punishments could vary depending on the status of the victim and offender. Now, a wealthy household had more resources than a laborer's family. Temples and palaces could command large groups of workers. War and debt could push people into vulnerable positions. It is tempting to look at ancient cities and see only their clever inventions. But every civilization also has questions of power. Who owns the field? Who does the canal work? Who receives the grain? Who can read the records? Who speaks before a judge? Mesopotamia gives no simple answer because it lasted so long and changed so often. But it reminds us that early cities were not automatically fair cities. Their achievements existed alongside hierarchy, coercion, and hardship. History becomes more honest when we hold both truths at once. Fact 46. Women's lives in Mesopotamia were varied and cannot be reduced to one simple picture. Some Mesopotamian women managed property, entered contracts, worked in temples or households, produced textiles, held religious roles, and appeared in legal documents. Others lived under strong limits imposed by family, class, marriage arrangements, and social custom. A wealthy priestess, a queen, a merchant's wife, a weaver, and an enslaved woman did not experience the same world. Time also mattered. Rules and opportunities changed from one city and era to another. The surviving tablets sometimes preserve women's names in practical contexts. They may be buying or selling property, receiving rations, running businesses, dedicating offerings, or appearing in family records. These documents are valuable because they make clear that women were not absent from the economic and legal life of Mesopotamia. At the same time, surviving sources often come from institutions controlled by men. There are many lives that were never written down. The wisest picture is therefore a careful one. Women shaped Mesopotamian history in many ways, but their freedoms and burdens depended greatly on circumstance. Fact 47. Marriage and family were important legal and economic institutions. Marriage in Mesopotamia involved affection and household life, but it could also involve property, agreements, inheritance, and obligations between families. Tablets record marriage arrangements, dowries, gifts, divorces, adoptions, and disputes over children or land. A household was not only a private emotional space, it was also an economic unit. Families produced food, raised children, managed property, worked in crafts, cared for elders, and tried to preserve resources across generations. Adoption was one way families could arrange inheritance or care. A person without children might adopt an heir. Agreements could set out duties and rights in surprisingly detailed ways. This does not mean every family experience was written down in a contract. It means the legal system reached deeply into family life when property or responsibility was at stake. Across the centuries, people in Mesopotamia worried about familiar things. Whether a child would be cared for, whether land would remain in the family, whether a marriage agreement would be honored, and whether relatives would remember their obligations. Fact 48. Kings often described themselves as shepherds of their people. In Mesopotamian royal language, a king might be called a shepherd. This was not because he literally spent each day tending sheep. It was a metaphor for protection, guidance, provision, and order. A good shepherd was expected to keep the flock safe, lead it toward food and water, and defend it from danger. By using this image, rulers claimed they cared for the people and maintained justice. They built canals, restored temples, defeated enemies, and presented themselves as guardians of prosperity. Of course, royal inscriptions were not neutral reports. Kings wanted to sound wise, strong, and beloved. They rarely carved a monument saying that a policy had failed or that people were unhappy. We have to read royal claims carefully. Still, the shepherd image tells us something about the ideal. A ruler was not supposed to be only a conqueror. He was expected to make the land productive, protect the weak, make in some measure, and keep the city's relationship with the gods in balance. Even power needed a story of care. Fact 49. The Sumerian king list blends memory, myth, and politics. One famous Mesopotamian text is called the Sumerian king list. It presents a sequence of rulers and dynasties, beginning with kings who supposedly ruled for impossibly long spans before a great flood. Later sections include figures who may have historical connections. The list is fascinating, but it should not be read like a modern chronology. It was shaped by ideas about legitimate kingship. It suggests that kingship descended from heaven and moved from city to city. This made political power feel like something with a sacred, continuous history. Some names in the list appear elsewhere. Others are legendary or difficult to verify. Gilgamesh, for example, is included as a king of Uruk, but he is also the hero of epic literature. The king list teaches us how Mesopotamians organized the past in their minds. They did not merely collect dates. They built a story in which siege rose, kingship moved, floods divided time, and political authority had a cosmic pattern. history and myth were not always placed in separate boxes. Fact 50. Sargon of Akkad created one of the earliest known territorial empires. Before Sargon, southern Mesopotamia was divided among competing city-states. Around the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, Sargon of Akkad conquered many of them and brought a much larger region under one dynasty. His empire is often described as one of the first known territorial empires. Sargon's own city, Akkad or Agade, has not yet been found by archaeologists. That absence makes the empire feel almost dreamlike. We know it through texts, later traditions, art, and the traces of its influence. Yet its capital still hides somewhere in the landscape. The Akkadian rulers used military force, administrative control, alliances, and symbolic power. They connected distant regions through a wider political system. This created new possibilities for trade, communication, and royal ambition. It also created new pressures because controlling a large and diverse territory is never simple. Sargon became a legendary figure in later Mesopotamian memory. His story was retold because he represented a bold idea that power could extend far beyond one city wall. Fact 51. The Akkadian Empire did not erase older Sumerian traditions. When Sargon's dynasty rose, Akkadian became more prominent in government and royal culture, but Sumerian did not simply disappear. The two traditions interacted. Sumerian continued to be used in religious, literary, and learned contexts for centuries. This mixing is one of the quiet strengths of Mesopotamian history. New powers often adopted older traditions rather than replacing everything. A ruler could govern in Akkadian while honoring Sumerian cities and gods. A scribe could learn both languages. A temple could preserve old hymns even as new political realities formed around it. Cultural change is rarely a clean swap. People keep customs, borrow words, reshape stories, and make old symbols serve new purposes. Mesopotamia offers many examples of this layered continuity. When we read a tablet, we may be seeing several worlds at once. The language may be Akkadian. The script may have roots in Sumerian practice. The god may have a local name. The ruler may belong to an empire. All of these layers rest together in a few lines of clay. Fact 52. Naram-Sin showed how far royal ambition could go. Naram-Sin, a later ruler of the Akkadian dynasty, led campaigns across a wide area and presented himself in unusually exalted ways. In some inscriptions and images, he appears with divine symbols and is associated with a title that proclaimed him a god of Akkad. This was a remarkable claim. Mesopotamian kings often described themselves as chosen by gods, loved by gods, or servants of gods. Naram-Sin went further in royal imagery and language. His victory stele shows him climbing a mountain, larger than other figures, wearing a horned helmet associated with divinity. The image is powerful because it turns military victory into something cosmic. The king is not simply winning a battle. He appears to stand above ordinary human scale. But this kind of claim also reveals the pressures of empire. A ruler who controls many cities needs symbols big enough to command loyalty and fear across long distances. Naram Sin's divine kingship was one answer. Make the emperor seem like more than a man. Fact 53. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire was probably not caused by one thing alone. Later, Mesopotamian texts sometimes blamed the fall of Akkad on divine anger or the mistakes of rulers. Modern scholars look at a wider range of possibilities. Political strain, rebellion, changing trade patterns, climate stress, conflict and pressure from groups beyond the empire's core. Large states can appear powerful right up until they stop being able to coordinate food, soldiers, taxes, communication, and loyalty. The Akkadian Empire stretched across many regions. That reach was impressive, but it also made the system vulnerable. It is tempting to want one dramatic answer. A drought, an invasion, a bad king. History is usually more tangled. Environmental change may matter, but it operates through human systems. A dry period becomes a crisis when fields, institutions, and people are already under strain. The fall of Akkad did not mean life in Mesopotamia ended. Cities, languages, and traditions continued. The great empire became a memory, a warning and a model for later rulers who dreamed of uniting the land again. Fact 54. Gudea of Lagash is remembered for building rather than conquering. After the Akkadian period, the ruler Gudea governed the city-state of Lagash in southern Mesopotamia. He is famous for many surviving statues and inscriptions. Unlike some kings who emphasize battle, Gudea is especially associated with temple construction, religious devotion, and orderly rule. His statues often show him seated or standing with a calm, deliberate expression. Some carry plans or inscriptions connected to building projects. He wanted to be remembered as a ruler who restored sacred places and served the gods. Proper continuity. This does not mean his world was peaceful in every sense. Politics and power were never absent. But his image reveals another royal ideal. A king could gain prestige by repairing canals, providing for temples, and ensuring that divine worship continued correctly. Gudea's statues are quietly compelling. They do not shout. They sit in stillness, carved from hard stone, carrying a message from a world where building well could be as important to royal memory as fighting bravely. Fact 55. The third dynasty of created a highly organized state. Around 2100 BCE, Namu established the third dynasty of often called III. From the city of this dynasty controlled much of southern Mesopotamia and built a strong administrative system. Thousands of tablets from this period record workers, animals' fields, rations, taxes, deliveries, and official tasks. The volume of documentation can feel almost overwhelming. It shows a state trying to observe and manage many parts of life through writing. III rulers also built and restored temples, including the famous ziggurat at They presented themselves as defenders of order after an earlier period of disruption. Administration helped them gather resources, mobilize labor, and maintain authority across a broad area. But detailed records also reveal the cost of organization. People became entries in systems of work and rationing. Officials had to keep track of every movement. A state can become powerful by counting, but it also becomes dependent on the accuracy and effort of countless scribes. In the soft clay of Ur-3 tablets, government becomes visible one line at a time. Fact 56. Ur-Nammu is associated with one of the oldest surviving law collections. Ur-Nammu, founder of the third dynasty of Ur, is linked with a collection of laws that predates Hammurabi's more famous stela by several centuries. Only parts survive, but they show that Mesopotamian rulers were already presenting themselves as guardians of legal order, long before Jabal-on rose to prominence, Shiti Khan-Shin the Licht Boshim's-Gut. The surviving clauses deal with issues such as injury, marriage, and social wrongdoing. They remind us that law was not invented all at once by one famous king. It developed through long traditions of judgment, custom, writing, and royal authority. Like later legal collections, the laws of Ur-Nammu probably served both practical and symbolic purposes. They could guide decisions, but they also told people what kind of ruler the king wished to be seen as: someone who opposed disorder and upheld justice. The ancient world is full of names that survive because later generations remembered them. Ur-Nammu is one of them. His ziggurat still rises in the landscape, while fragments of his law collection preserve another part of his ambition, to shape not only buildings, but the rules of life. Fact 57. Shulgi of Ur turned royal image-making into a careful art. Shulgi, son of Ur-Nammu, ruled for many years and expanded the power of the Ur-3 state. His inscriptions and hymns present him as a remarkable ruler. Strong, wise, athletic, learned, devout, and tireless. Ancient kings often praised themselves, but Shulgi's self-presentation is especially vivid. He is associated with claims about running long distances, mastering knowledge, supporting temples, and governing well. Whether every claim is literal is less important than the image being created. A ruler in a large state needed more than armies. He needed a story. People in distant cities had to believe that the king was capable, favored by the gods, and worthy of obedience. Poetry and inscriptions helped carry that story. This does not make Shulgi's achievements unreal. It simply reminds us to listen to royal texts with both interest and caution. A king's voice is often the loudest voice in the archive. The task of history is to hear it clearly without letting it drown out everyone else. Fact 58. Old Babylon was once a small city before it became famous. Babylon later became one of the most famous names in world history, but it was not always the dominant city of Mesopotamia. In earlier periods, it was one settlement among many in a landscape already rich with ancient cities and traditions. Its rise came gradually. Political opportunities, trade routes, military success, and skilled rulers helped it grow. By the time of Hammurabi, Babylon had become a major center. Later, under the Neo-Babylonian kings, it would become a symbol of imperial power, monumental architecture, and learned scholarship. This long rise is worth remembering because it shows how cities change. No city is important forever simply because it exists. Places become powerful through geography, institutions, labor, leadership, and luck. They can also decline when those conditions change. Babylon's story began long before its famous Blue Gate and legendary gardens. It started in the patient way cities often do, with people making homes, managing fields, building shrines, and slowly becoming central to a larger world. Fact 59. Hammurabi was a conqueror as well as a lawgiver. Hammurabi is often remembered only because of the legal stele bearing his name, but he was also an energetic king who expanded Babylon's control through diplomacy, warfare, shifting alliances, and careful timing. Early in his reign, Babylon was not the strongest power in the region. Other cities and kingdoms, including Larsa, Mara, Eshnunna, and Assyria, mattered greatly. Hammurabi waited, negotiated, fought, and gradually defeated or absorbed rivals. By the end of his reign, Babylon controlled a much larger territory than it had at the beginning. This wider political story helps explain the law collection. A ruler of a growing kingdom needed to present himself as more than a successful general. He needed to appear as the source of justice, stability, and proper order. Hammurabi's reign shows the double nature of kingship in Mesopotamia. The king might be pictured receiving law from a god, but he also had to handle diplomacy, supply armies, protect canals, and make hard decisions in a crowded political landscape. Fact 60. The letters from Mari make ancient politics feel surprisingly close. Mari was an important city on the Euphrates, in what is now Syria. Thousands of clay tablets from Sarmas Palace Archive preserve letters and administrative records from the 18th century BCE, around the time of Hammurabi. These letters are wonderful because they are not only polished royal inscriptions. They include reports, worries, orders, rumors, complaints, requests, and practical details. Officials write about travelers, soldiers, gifts, weather, diplomacy, and the movement of goods. A king in Mari could receive information from far away, but communication was slow. Messengers had to travel. News could arrive late, incomplete, or colored by the interests of the person reporting it. That makes the letters feel familiar. Governments have always depended on information, and information has always been imperfect. The Mari archive reminds us that ancient states were not silent blocks of stone. They were noisy networks of human voices. Someone was always sending a message, waiting for a reply, worrying about what a neighboring ruler might do, or trying to keep an ordinary problem from becoming a large one. Fact 61. Babylonian gods and politics became closely linked through Marduk. Marduk began as the local god of Babylon, but as Babylon became more powerful, Marduk's importance grew. In later Babylonian tradition, he was presented as a supreme divine figure, especially in the great creation story, often called the Enuma Elish. In that story, Marduk defeats forces of chaos and helps create an ordered world. The poem also explains why other gods grant him high authority. This was theology, but it was also political imagination. The rise of Babylon could be reflected in the rise of its god. Ancient people did not necessarily see this as cynical propaganda. For them, city, god, king, and cosmos could be genuinely connected. If Babylon became important, then Marduk's greatness might seem like a fact about the structure of reality. The story shows how myths can change with history. Gods do not always stay in the same place in a religious landscape. As cities rise and fall, divine hierarchies can be retold. Even the heavens, in a sense, were shaped by the fortunes of earthly cities. Fact 62. The Enuma Elish is a creation story about order emerging from chaos. The Enuma Elish begins before the world is fully arranged. Primeval waters exist, divine generations appear, conflict grows, and finally Marduk defeats the sea goddess, Tiamat. From her divided body, he helps form the ordered cosmos. The story may sound violent, but its central concern is order. Who has authority? How can chaos be contained? Why do the gods have their roles? Why does Babylon's god stand at the center of a stable world? For Mesopotamians, creation was not only a question of how rocks or stars first appeared. It was also a question of why life needs rules, boundaries, cities, kings, rituals, and rhythms. The universe became livable when forces were given a place. In annual festivals, the story could be recited and renewed. That tells us something beautiful about ancient religion. Order was not assumed to run forever on its own. It had to be remembered, performed, and cared for, much like a canal bank or a temple wall. Fact 63. Babylon's great ziggurat may stand behind later stories of the Tower of Babel. The city of Babylon had a great temple tower called Etemenanki, a name often translated as something like the house that is the foundation of heaven and earth. It was associated with the god Marduk and became one of the striking features of the city. The exact appearance of the structure is still debated, because ancient buildings change, decay, and are rebuilt. But it was clearly an imposing stepped tower, part of a large, sacred complex. Its memory likely contributed to later traditions about the Tower of Babel. The connection should be made with care. Biblical stories have their own meanings and histories. Yet Babylon's ziggurat offered a real monumental image. Human beings building upward in a famous city whose name became loaded with symbolism at night. A ziggurat would have changed the horizon. It was not a mountain made by nature. It was a mountain made from organized labor, faith, and bricks. People looking up from the street could see the city's ambition taking shape against the stars. 64. Fact 64. The Ishtar Gate, once shone with blue-glazed brick. In the Neo-Babylonian period, especially under King Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon was rebuilt and enlarged on a grand scale. One of its most famous features was the Ishtar Gate, an inner city gate decorated with vivid glazed bricks. Its deep blue surface was designed to resemble lapis lazuli, Rows of lions, bulls, and dragon-like creatures moved across the walls in relief. These animals were connected with major gods, including Ishtar, Adad, and Marduk. The gate was not only a beautiful object, it was part of a ceremonial landscape. Processions moved along the nearby route during religious festivals, linking royal power, divine presence, and the public life of the city. Today, reconstructed portions of the gate are displayed far from Babylon, but the idea remains powerful. Imagine a traveler entering a city of sun-baked earth and suddenly seeing a wall of gleaming blue. The color itself would have felt like an announcement. Babylon was saying, "You have entered somewhere rich, ordered, and unforgettable." Fact 65. Nebuchadnezzar II made Babylon a symbol of imperial grandeur. Nebuchadnezzar II ruled in the 6th century BCE and became the most famous king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. During his reign, Babylon's walls, temples, gates, and palace complexes were expanded or restored. The city became a powerful expression of royal ambition. His building inscriptions repeatedly emphasize brickwork, restoration, divine favor, and the glory of Babylon. This was not mere decoration. In Mesopotamia, building was a political act. A ruler who repaired a temple or raised a wall showed that he could protect the city and please its gods. Nebuchadnezzar's name also became well known through later biblical and historical traditions. That fame can make him seem almost larger than life. But behind the legend was a real king managing an empire with soldiers, officials, taxes, diplomacy, and construction projects. The buildings mattered because they made power visible. A city wall, a processional road, or a glazed gate could turn an abstract claim into something a person could walk beside, touch, and remember. Fact 66. The Hanging Gardens may be famous, partly because they are uncertain. Ancient writers described the Hanging Gardens of Babylon as one of the wonders of the world. They imagined terraces full of trees and flowing water rising above the dry plain. But archaeologists have not found clear, universally accepted evidence that such gardens existed at Babylon, exactly as later descriptions suggest. Some scholars think the stories may have been exaggerated. Others have proposed that the gardens were associated with another city, perhaps Nineveh in Assyria. The question remains open. This uncertainty does not make the story useless. It reveals how ancient fame works. A city can become so semprevev that later generations add layers of wonder to it. A real palace, water system, or royal garden may grow larger in the telling until it becomes almost impossible to separate memory from imagination. For a sleepy history, the Hanging Gardens are a lovely reminder that not every famous ancient story comes with a neat answer. Sometimes history gives us a garden we can almost see, watered by distant machines, but still partly hidden behind the curtain of time. Fact 67. Assyria grew in the north of Mesopotamia, where the landscape was different. Northern Mesopotamia was not the same as the hot, southern alluvial plain. It had rolling land, different rainfall patterns, access to mountain routes, and different relationships with surrounding regions. Here the city of Ashur became an important center, giving its name to Assyria. Assyrian history stretched across many centuries. At different times, Assyria was a city-state, a trading society, a regional kingdom, and eventually the center of a vast empire. Its people shared much with southern Mesopotamia, including cuneiform writing and many gods, but developed their own political style and artistic traditions. The Assyrian heartland lay along the Tigris and its tributaries. This location connected it with routes toward Anatolia, Iran, Syria, and the Levant. Trade, warfare, agriculture, and diplomacy all met there. It is helpful to think of Assyria not as an interruption in Mesopotamian history, but as one of its great northern chapters. The same ancient world could look very different, depending on whether you stood in a southern marsh, a Babylonian street, or an Assyrian hill country. Fact 68. Assyrian merchants built long-distance trade networks before the empire reached its height. In the early 2nd millennium BCE, Assyrian merchants from the city of Ashur traded with communities in Anatolia, especially through colonies and commercial centers such as Kanesh. They carried textiles and tin and received silver and other goods in return. Thousands of tablets from these trading networks preserve letters, contracts, accounts, and family concerns. They reveal merchants worrying about prices, shipments, debts, partners, and relatives far from home. The ancient business world had its own versions of delayed deliveries and anxious messages. Trade was often a family affair. Men might travel, while women at home helped produce textiles and managed parts of the household economy. Written communication kept people connected across long distances. These tablets make Assyria feel less like a future military empire and more like a world of practical traders. Before kings commanded enormous armies, merchants were already building links of trust, credit, risk, and information. Commerce was one of the quiet roads by which Mesopotamian culture traveled. Fact 69. Assyrian kings built palaces designed to overwhelm visitors. When Assyria became a major empire in the 1st millennium BCE, its kings created huge palace-complexes at cities, such as Nimrod, Khorsabad, and Nineveh. These were not private homes in the modern sense. They were administrative centers, ceremonial stages, storehouses of prestige, and places where imperial power could be displayed. Wester. Visitors passed through large gates and rooms lined with carved stone reliefs. The walls showed kings hunting lions, receiving tribute, leading armies, crossing rivers, besieging cities, and standing before gods. Every surface helped tell a story about who ruled and why. The palaces also contained real working spaces, archives, storerooms, courtyards, workshops, and rooms for officials. Power required paperwork as well as spectacle. Imagine entering one of these spaces after traveling across dusty roads. You would see enormous stone figures at the gates and long scenes of royal success on the walls. The message would be hard to miss. The Assyrian king wanted visitors to feel that they had stepped inside the center of a world too powerful to resist. Fact 70. Lamassu guarded Assyrian gateways with human intelligence and animal strength. At the entrances to Assyrian palaces stood massive guardian figures called lamassu. They usually had the body of a bull or lion, wings like a bird, and a human head. Their faces were calm and bearded, while their bodies suggested enormous force. The combination was deliberate. A human head could suggest intelligence. A powerful animal body could suggest strength. Wings could suggest a supernatural ability to move between worlds. Together, the lamassu guarded doorways, not only physically, but symbolically. Many lamassu were carved with 5 legs. From the front, they seemed to stand still. From the side, they seemed to walk. This clever artistic solution allowed the figure to appear powerful from more than one angle. To pass between lamassu was to enter a protected royal space. They were more than statues. They were threshold beings, standing between outside and inside, ordinary life and palace authority. Even today, their scale can make a viewer feel small. They still perform their ancient task of making an entrance feel important. Fact 71. Assyrian reliefs were imperial stories carved in stone. The long relief panels in Assyrian palaces are among the most detailed visual records from the ancient Near East. They show military campaigns, hunting scenes, river crossings, tribute bearers, gardens, and ceremonies. Their details can be astonishing. Armor, horses, trees, boats, tools, clothing, and faces. These scenes were not meant to be neutral documentaries. They present the king as brave, controlled, victorious, and favored by the gods. Enemies often appear defeated or desperate. The king appears steady at the center of action, but the reliefs still provide valuable information. They show how Assyrians imagined warfare, royal ritual, animals, landscapes, and foreign peoples. They also show the skill of artists who could turn a flat stone wall into a moving world of bodies and events. Originally, some reliefs may have been enhanced with color, which would have made the rooms even more vivid. Today, we often see pale stone in museums. In ancient palaces, the scenes may have felt brighter, louder, and more alive. Fact 72. Assyrian royal hunts were staged messages about order. Assyrian kings are often shown hunting lions in palace reliefs. At first, the scenes look like dramatic sport, but they were also political images. The king's victory over a dangerous animal symbolized his ability to defeat chaos and protect the land. Lions were powerful and feared. To confront one in art was to show courage. To defeat one was to show mastery. The king appeared as someone who could control both human enemies and the wild forces beyond the city. Some hunting scenes may represent carefully organized royal events rather than chance encounters in the wilderness. That does not make them less meaningful. It makes them more theatrical. The palace wall became a stage where the king performed his role as guardian of order. The reliefs can be intense, even uncomfortable, because they show violence in detail. But they also reveal how ancient rulers understood power. A king had to be more than a manager of taxes. He had to look capable of meeting danger face to face and restoring calm after the struggle. Fact 73. The library of Ashurbanipal preserved thousands of tabs at Nineveh. When King Ashurbanipal ruled Assyria in the 7th century BCE and was proud of his learning. At his capital, Nineveh, a large collection of tablets was gathered that modern scholars call the Library of Ashurbanipal. When more than 30,000 tablets and fragments were found there. They include royal inscriptions, letters, legal documents, medical texts, omens, rituals, dictionaries, myths, epics, and astronomical works. Among them were versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The word library can make us picture shelves of modern books. The ancient collection was different. Tablets came in many sizes and shapes, and their organization was not exactly like a modern public library. Yet, the purpose was recognizably intellectual: to gather, preserve, copy, and consult knowledge. It is an extraordinary thought. In a palace city known for military power, there was also an immense effort to collect the written heritage of Mesopotamia. The empire wanted armies and archives. It wanted territory, but it also wanted texts. Fact 74. Ancient libraries depended on copying because there was no printing press. Every cuneiform tablet had to be written by hand. If a text mattered, scribes copied it. If a copy broke, another might survive somewhere else. If a king wanted an old work brought to his palace, experts might search for versions, borrow tablets, or make new copies. This process made texts both fragile and resilient. A single tablet could be lost easily, but a story copied across many cities and centuries could survive in several forms. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, changed and developed over time, as scribes translated, combined, and revised older traditions. Copying was not always exact. A scribe might make a mistake, use a different wording, or arrange material differently. That can frustrate modern readers, but it also shows that literature was alive. Texts traveled through human hands. In the quiet concentration of a scribe, civilization renewed itself. A student copied a list. A priest copied a hymn. A scholar copied a sky record. Each fresh tablet carried old knowledge forward, one careful wedge at a time. Fact 75. The Assyrian Empire used deportation as a tool of control. Assyrian kings sometimes moved large groups of people from conquered regions to other parts of the empire. This practice is called deportation or resettlement. It could punish resistance, weaken local power structures, provide labor, and repopulate areas useful to the state. The human cost was enormous. Families were forced away from familiar land, languages, and communities. They faced uncertainty and loss. Imperial inscriptions may describe these movements as orderly achievements, but behind the official language were real lives disrupted by conquest. At the same time, resettlement made the empire more interconnected. Craftspeople, farmers, soldiers, and administrators from different places lived together in new regions. Skills, languages, and customs moved with them. This is a difficult part of Mesopotamian history, and it should not be softened away. Empires can create roads, archives, and trade networks while also causing suffering. The Assyrian case makes that especially clear. Its power was impressive, but it was often built through fear as well as organization. Fact 76. Assyrian engineers moved water across difficult landscapes. Assyrian rulers built and repaired canals, dams, and aqueducts to bring water towards cities and agricultural land. King Sennacherib, who ruled in the early 7th century BCE, is especially associated with ambitious water projects serving Nineveh. These works required surveying, labor, stonework, planning, and maintenance. Water had to travel across uneven terrain without losing its course. An aqueduct could carry a channel over a valley. A canal could extend the reach of a city's resources. Engineering in Mesopotamia was not always hidden below ground. Some projects became royal monuments. Inscriptions celebrated them. They showed that a king could command nature as well as armies. Yet water systems were never permanent victories. They needed care. Sediment, damage, drought, and political change could affect them. The story of Mesopotamian engineering is therefore a story of continuing attention. To bring water to a city was not one achievement. It was a promise that had to be renewed every season. Fact 77. Cities could be conquered more than once and still return to life. Mesopotamian history can seem like a long sequence of rise and fall. Cities were captured, burned, abandoned, rebuilt, renamed, and revived. But decline was rarely total or immediate. People often remained. Fields were replanted, temples were restored, old walls became foundations for new ones. Babylon itself passed through many periods of weakness and renewal. Ur was destroyed and rebuilt. Assyrian capitals changed. Ancient mounds contain layers of occupation because people returned to useful places again and again. This persistence matters. A city is not only its king or its palace. It is its location, water access, roads, traditions, and people's memories. Even after disaster, those things can draw life back. For someone walking across an ancient ruin, the mounds may look still, but beneath them are repeated beginnings. A family builds a house over an older wall. A new ruler repairs an old temple. A scribe copies an older text. Mesopotamia was not only a land of endings, it was a land of return. Fact 78. Babylon fell to Cyrus of Persia in 539 BCE. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia entered Babylon, bringing the Neo-Babylonian Empire to an end. The change was important, but it did not erase Babylon overnight. The city remained a major center under Persian rule, and its scholars continued to work with old traditions. Sources about Cyrus's arrival include royal texts that present the event in favorable terms. One famous Babylonian document, often called the Cyrus Cylinder, describes the Persian king as chosen by Marduk to restore order after the rule of Nabonidus. Knox. Like other royal inscriptions, it should be read as political messaging as well as historical evidence. The Persian conquest shows how one Mesopotamian era flowed into another. New rulers came, but canals, temples, tablets, and local communities continued. Empires changed hands. The deep habits of urban and scholarly life did not vanish at the same speed. For the people of Babylon, history was not a clean line ending in one year. It was a series of adjustments. New officials, new taxes, new royal names, and the same old need for food, water, contracts, and the favor of the gods. Fact 79. Aramaic became widely used alongside Cuneiform. Over time, Aramaic spread widely across the Near East as a spoken and written language. It used an alphabetic script that could be written on materials such as leather, papyrus, and parchment, many of which do not survive, as well as clay. Cuneiform remained important for learned, official, religious, and scholarly purposes in Babylonia and Assyria. But Aramaic became increasingly useful in administration and everyday communication across large regions. This means the surviving clay tablets do not tell us everything. A great deal of writing may once have existed on perishable materials. The archaeological record favors clay because clay lasts. History, therefore, has a material bias. We hear some voices loudly because their writing medium survived, while others are fainter because their words were written on things that decayed. The coexistence of scripts also shows that Mesopotamia was never frozen in one ancient. Its people adopted new tools of communication while preserving older ones. Cuneiform did not disappear suddenly. It shared the world with newer ways of writing. Fact 80. The last known cuneiform texts were written long after the old empires had fallen. Cuneiform began in the late 4th millennium BCE and continued in use for more than 3,000 years. The latest known examples are astronomical texts from the 1st century CE. By then, the world of Sumerian kings and Assyrian palaces was already ancient history. This long survival is remarkable. A script, invented for early administration, lived through city-states, empires, conquests, new languages, and changing religions. It adapted repeatedly, then and finally faded as other forms of writing became more common. The end was probably gradual. Fewer people learned the difficult signs. Fewer institutions needed traditional tablets. Knowledge became concentrated in smaller circles of scholars before the practice disappeared. There is something quietly moving about the last cuneiform scribes. They were writing in a tradition older than many kingdoms around them. Each wedge they pressed into clay belonged to a chain of teachers and students stretching back thousands of years. When the final tablets were written, nobody could know they were final. History rarely announces its last day. A practice simply becomes rarer, then silent, leaving its traces to wait beneath the earth. Fact 81. Nippur was a sacred city, even when it was not a political capital. Nippur, in central southern Mesopotamia, was especially important because it was associated with Enlil, one of the most powerful gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Control of the city could carry religious prestige. even for rulers whose main capitals were elsewhere. Nippur's temples and archives made it a center of learning and worship. Rulers from different cities sought the favor of Enlil and presented themselves as legitimate guardians of the sacred order connected with Nippur. This shows that political power and religious importance did not always sit in the same place. A king could rule from Babylon, or Assur while still caring deeply about a holy city beyond his own palace. Nippur's story also lasted a long time. It was inhabited and revered across many changing eras. It is preserved tablets, temples, and evidence of people who returned again and again to a place whose spiritual authority outlived the rise and fall of particular dynasties. Some cities are famous for walls or armies. Nippur was famous for being a place where the gods, kings, and learned traditions seemed to meet. Fact 82. Was a city of the moon god Nana. The city of near the southern marshlands was closely connected with Nana, also known in Akkadian as Sin, the moon god. Its famous ziggurat supported a temple dedicated to him. The moon's regular cycle made Nana an important figure in the measurement of time and in the rhythm of religious life. Was not only a sacred center, it was also a major urban and trading city, with links to the Gulf and wider networks. Its royal cemetery, temple complex, houses, and archives reveal many sides of Mesopotamian society. The moon god's presence shaped the city's identity. In a world without electric light, the changing moon mattered deeply. Its phases helped mark months. Its brightness changed the night. Its return after darkness could feel like a reliable pattern in an uncertain world. When people climbed toward the ziggurat of they were climbing toward the temple of a god whose sign was visible above them. The city and the sky were connected by more than metaphor. The sacred landscape reflected the night itself. Fact 83. Uruk remained important long after its earliest glory. Uruk is often described as one of the earliest great cities. But its importance did not end with the first invention of writing. It continued as a sacred and urban center for millennia, changing with each new political era. The city was associated with Inanna and later with the sky god Anu. Its temples, walls, and literary reputation gave it deep prestige. Even when other cities became more powerful, Uruk remained a place of ancient memory. This long life is easy to overlook because history books like beginnings. Uruk gives us early writing, early cities, and the hero, Gilgamesh. But it also gives us endurance. People kept returning to it, worshipping there, building there, and remembering stories tied to its streets. A city can survive by becoming more than a political capital. It can become a sacred place, a literary symbol, a center of regional identity. Uruk was all of these. Its name carried the weight of deep time. Like a word, people spoke with respect, because it had already been old for centuries. Fact 84. Eridu was remembered as an ancient city at the edge of the world. Eridu, in southern Mesopotamia, was one of the earliest important settlements in the region. In later tradition, it was associated with Enki, the god of fresh water, wisdom, and craft. Its location near marshy waters suited that connection. Ancient texts sometimes present Eridu as a place of very early kingship or sacred beginnings. Whether every tradition is historically exact is less important than what it reveals. Mesopotamians themselves looked back toward Eridu as a city of deep antiquity. The archaeology of Eridu shows repeated building and rebuilding over long periods. Temples rose on the same place, one above another, as if each generation wanted to continue a relationship with the ground beneath it. Eridu reminds us that the ancient world already had its own ancient past. A Babylonian scholar could look back at Sumerian cities as remote and venerable. People living thousands of years ago already felt the pull of ruins, old stories, and places whose beginnings were hard to see clearly. And fact 85. A tell is a hill made by many generations of human life. When mud brick buildings decay, their materials often remain close to where they stood. If people build again on the same spot, then later buildings rise over earlier ones. After centuries or millennia, the result can be a mound called a tell. Many Mesopotamian archaeological sites are tells. They are not natural hills in the ordinary sense. They are layered records of houses, streets, walls, ovens, burials, drains, and discarded objects. Each layer represents people living, working, repairing, and leaving traces. Excavating a tell is delicate work. Archaeologists have to move carefully because each layer can answer a different question. A wall from one period may sit above a floor from another. A tablet in a room can help date a whole section of the site. Utli's history made physical. It is time gathered into earth. From a distance, it may look like a quiet rise in a flat landscape. Beneath it may be thousands of years of ordinary mornings, market days, temple rituals, arguments, meals, births, deaths, and nights beneath the same sky. Fact 86. Archaeology has changed the way we understand Mesopotamia. For a long time, much of what people knew about Mesopotamia came through later Greek, biblical, and classical traditions. In the 19th and 20th centuries, excavations at places such as Nineveh, Nimrud, Nippur, and Babylon uncovered tablets, reliefs, buildings, and everyday objects that transformed the picture. Archaeology did not simply confirm old stories. It complicated them. It revealed cities older than many written traditions, showed how ordinary people lived, and made clear that the region contained many cultures rather than one simple civilization. Early excavations sometimes removed objects in ways that would now be questioned. Archaeology has its own history of imperial competition, unequal power, and divided collections. Modern work places more emphasis on careful recording, conservation, local partnership, and protecting sites from looting and damage. This is worth remembering, because the past does not arrive by itself. It is uncovered, interpreted, translated, displayed, and debated by people in the present. Each tablet and wall tells an ancient story, but it also has a modern story about how it was found and how it should be cared for. Fact 87. Cuneiform had to be deciphered before its long silence could be heard again. For centuries, people saw cuneiform inscriptions without knowing how to read them. The wedge-shaped signs looked like a lost code. In the 19th century, scholars gradually worked out how the script functioned by comparing inscriptions and studying multilingual texts. The Behistun inscription in Iran was especially important. It appeared in several languages, including Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. By using the known Old Persian text as a guide, researchers could begin to unlock the others. Decipherment was slow and collaborative. It required copying difficult inscriptions, testing readings, comparing signs, and correcting errors. There was no single magical moment when all of Mesopotamia suddenly began to speak again. Once the script became readable, the ancient world grew far richer. Instead of only seeing carved kings, scholars could read letters, stories, contracts, lists, omens, and school exercises. Mesopotamia returned not only as a landscape of ruins, but as a world of voices. A silence of 2,000 years began to fill with words. Fact 88. The Babylonian map of the world shows that ancient people imagined the world in symbolic ways. A famous clay tablet, sometimes called the Babylonian map of the world, presents the known world as a circular form surrounded by a ring of water. Babylon is marked, and rivers, regions, and distant places appear in a small, stylized arrangement. It is not a map in the modern GPS sense. It does not try to give every location with exact scale. Instead, it mixes geography, worldview, and meaning. So, the center is not just a point on Earth. It is a statement about where Babylon stood in the imagination of its makers. This is common in human history. Maps often show what people value, fear, or consider central. They are not only technical tools, they are stories about space. The Babylonian map reminds us that Mesopotamians were curious about the lands beyond their cities. They traded widely, heard travelers' tales, and wondered about distant edges of the world. Even in a small circle of clay, we can feel the old desire to place home within a larger universe. Fact 89. Letters are among the most intimate objects left by Mesopotamia. A royal inscription speaks in the formal voice of power. A letter can speak in a much more immediate way. Mesopotamian letters include instructions, greetings, arguments, requests, warnings, reports, and complaints. Some writers sound worried. Some sound impatient. Some sound affectionate. Some are purely practical. A letter might ask someone to send goods, explain a delay, settle a debt, prepare for a visitor, or report on local conditions. It may begin with formal phrases, but the human purpose soon appears. Someone needed an answer. The tablet itself could be folded or enclosed in a clay envelope, then marked with seals. The message traveled with a messenger across roads, rivers, and city gates. Its arrival could change a household's plans or a king's decisions. These letters make it easier to feel the past as lived experience. Ancient people waited for news. They worried when a relative did not return. They reminded business partners of obligations. They tried to make themselves understood from far away. The distance between then and now grows smaller in a letter. Fact 90. Mesopotamian medicine combined observation, remedies, and ritual. Ancient Mesopotamian healers did not divide medicine and religion as sharply as many modern systems do. Some specialists focused on practical remedies using plants, minerals, oils, bandages, and other treatments. Others used incantations, purification, and ritual methods to address illness believed to have spiritual causes. This does not mean they ignored the body. Medical texts can describe symptoms, parts of the body, and treatment procedures. Healers observed fever, pain, wounds, skin changes, and other signs. They tried to classify what they saw and decide what action to take. At the same time, illness could be understood as involving gods, demons, broken taboos, or unseen forces. A patient might receive both a remedy and a ritual. The mixture may seem strange to us, but it reflects a basic human response to sickness. When someone is ill, people want every possible form of help. They want a diagnosis, a treatment, a prayer, a protective object, and a reason to hope. Ancient Mesopotamians sought care with the tools their world provided. Fact 91. Dreams were treated as messages worth thinking about. Dreams appear in Mesopotamian stories, letters, and rituals. A dream could be a personal experience, a warning, a divine sign, or a source of uncertainty. Kings might report dreams. Priests and specialists could interpret them. Ordinary people might wonder whether a strange night vision had meaning. The idea that dreams carry messages is very old and very widespread. In Mesopotamia, it fit naturally with a larger belief that the world contained signs. The gods might speak through the sky, the liver of a sacrificial animal, a sudden event, or the quiet images of sleep. Not every dream had to become a public prophecy. Many could simply be unsettling or memorable. But when a dream seemed important, people had ways to respond: ritual, consultation, prayer, or careful interpretation. There is something fitting about this in a history for sleep. Thousands of years ago, people lay down in mud brick homes under the same moon and entered their own mysterious dream worlds. They too woke, wondering what the night had tried to say. Fact 92. Mesopotamians followed lunar calendars, but they also watched the seasons closely. The moon played a central role in marking months. Its changing phases were visible to everyone, making it a natural guide for calendars. A new month could begin with the sighting of the new crescent moon. But a calendar also had to stay connected to the agricultural year. Planting, harvest, festivals, travel, and river conditions followed seasonal patterns. This required attention and adjustment. A society that relied on irrigation could not live by the moon alone. It had to watch fields, water, animals, and weather. Different cities and periods used different month names and calendar practices. Yet, the basic relationship remained. Time was not an abstract grid. It was a cycle of moonlight, work, ritual, heat, flood, and harvest. When a scribe dated a tablet, the date connected a private action to a shared rhythm. A lone marriage, delivery, or letter became part of the year's unfolding pattern. In the ancient world, even bureaucracy kept one eye on the moon. Fact 93. New Year festivals could renew the bond between god, king, and city. Babylon's Akitu festival, celebrated around the New Year, was one of the major religious events of the city. It involved ceremonies connected with Marduk, processions, sacred places, and royal authority. Festivals, like this, were not only celebrations. They renewed the order of the world as people understood it. The god's power, the king's role, the city's identity, and the turning of the year were brought together through ritual. Public ceremonies also allowed many kinds of people to participate in a shared event. Priests, officials, musicians, workers, visitors, and residents could all be affected by the movement of processions and the transformation of familiar streets. For a city like Babylon, the New Year was a reminder that time began again, but not automatically. Order had to be affirmed. The gods had to be honored. The king had to show humility before the divine. The community had to remember its place in a larger pattern. A festival can make a city feel like one body for a while. In ancient Mesopotamia, this feeling was part of what held urban life together. Fact 94. Mesopotamian armies changed over time, but logistics always mattered. The image of ancient warfare often focuses on chariots, weapons, sieges, and heroic kings. Those things mattered. But armies also depended on food, water, roads, messengers, animals, storage, bridges, and reliable information. A ruler could not simply decide to fight and appear at a distant city the next morning. Troops had to march. Supplies had to follow. Rivers had to be crossed. Camps had to be made. Horses, donkeys, and carts needed care. Scribes and officials often helped transform military ambition into organized action. Assyria became especially famous for large armies, siege techniques, and detailed campaign records. But earlier Mesopotamian city-states also fought over land and power. Warfare was part of the political landscape from very early times. The practical side is easy to miss, yet it is revealing. Behind every scene of a king in battle were many people carrying supplies, repairing equipment, recording rations, and trying to survive the journey. Even war depended on the same systems that supported cities in peace. Fact 95. Mesopotamian houses were often built around courtyards. Most people did not live in palaces or temples. They lived in houses, often made of mud brick and organized around an inner courtyard. The courtyard could provide light, air, workspace, and a measure of privacy from the street. Rooms around it might be used for sleeping, storage, cooking, weaving, receiving visitors, or keeping animals. The exact layout depended on wealth, location, and period. Some homes were modest. Others belonged to prosperous families and included more rooms or better materials. The street outside could be narrow and dusty. Inside, the courtyard created a small domestic world. Children played. Food was prepared. Fibers were spun. Tools were stored. Family members talked after the heat of the day had passed. Because mud brick erodes, houses can be hard to imagine from ruins alone. But archaeology, texts, and objects help rebuild the picture. Ancient Mesopotamia was not only a landscape of grand temples. It was also a vast network of homes where people cooked, argued, rested, and dreamed. Fact 96. Food in Mesopotamia was shaped by region, season, and social status. Bread, beer, barley, dates, onions, garlic, lentils, beans, fish, dairy products, and meat all had places in Mesopotamian diets. What a person ate depended on where they lived, what they could afford, and what the season provided. The rivers and marshes offered fish and birds. Herds provided milk, wool, and meat. Gardens produced fruits and vegetables. Grain remained essential because it could be stored, measured, and transformed into bread and beer. Elite banquets could include richer foods, imported goods, and elaborate serving vessels. Workers might receive simpler rations. Temples prepared offerings that could later be redistributed. Food was therefore both nourishment and a social language. A table can reveal hierarchy, trade, religion, and family life. A bowl of dates may point to a palm grove. A loaf of bread may point to a barley field, a millstone, an oven, and someone's hands. Even a quiet meal held the whole landscape inside it. Fact 97. Mesopotamian stories preserved wisdom as well as entertainment. The literature of Mesopotamia includes epics, hymns, laments, myths, proverbs, debates, and songs. These works did not all serve the same purpose. Some praised gods, some explained the world, some mourned destroyed cities, some taught practical wisdom, some simply played with ideas. There are texts in which objects or animals debate which one is more useful. There are proverbs that sound sharply observant about human behavior. There are laments that grieve for cities ruined by war or disaster. There are hymns whose language glows with devotion. This variety matters because it shows an intellectual culture with room for many moods. Mesopotamians did not only write orders and laws. They wrote to praise, remember, question, teach, and console. A story can survive because people find it useful, beautiful, or true in some deeper way. The tablets that preserve Mesopotamian literature are fragments of an enormous conversation. Their authors may be long gone, but their questions are still alive. What makes a good king? Why do cities fall? What do gods want? And how should a person live? Fact: it is misleading to say Mesopotamia invented everything. Mesopotamia is often called a cradle of civilization because it saw early cities, writing, mathematics, and complex institutions. That phrase can be useful, but it can also become too simple. Human creativity appeared in many parts of the world, and no civilization developed in isolation. Mesopotamian people borrowed, traded, adapted, and influenced others. They were connected with Anatolia, the Iranian plateau, the Levant, Egypt, the Gulf, and the Indus. valley. Ideas and materials moved across wide distances. It is better to see Mesopotamia as one of several great centers of early urban and literate life. Its achievements were enormous, but they were achieved by diverse peoples over thousands of years, often in conversation with neighbors. Sorwija Dontad. This more careful view does not make Mesopotamia less impressive. It makes it more real. Instead of imagining a single miracle appearing in an empty land, we see a crowded ancient world of exchange, experiment, rivalry, and shared human effort. Fact 99. Ancient Mesopotamia belongs to the living heritage of Iraq and the wider region. The ruins of Uruk, Eridu, Babylon, Ashur, Nineveh, and many other places are not merely settings for distant stories. They are part of the cultural heritage of modern Iraq and neighboring lands. Their preservation matters because the sites hold information that has not yet been studied and cannot be replaced once damaged. War, looting, development, weather, and neglect have threatened many ancient places. At the same time, Iraqi archaeologists, local communities, museums, scholars, and international organizations continue working to protect and understand them. Heritage is not only about objects in faraway galleries. It is about landscapes, memory, education, and the right of people to care for the history beneath their own ground. A broken tablet or eroding wall may still have a great deal to teach. When we listen to Mesopotamian history, we should remember that it is not finished. New discoveries, new translations, and new methods keep changing what we know. The ancient past is not a closed room. It is a field of living questions. Fact 100. Mesopotamia's deepest legacy may be the habit of recording a complicated world. The people of ancient Mesopotamia did not leave us one simple message. They left thousands of messages, often small and practical. Count this grain, deliver these sheep, send this letter, honor this god, measure this field, settle this dispute, remember this king, copy this story. Together, those messages show a society learning how to live at scale. Cities needed records. Trade needed trust. Temples needed routines. Families needed agreements. Scholars needed tables. Kings needed stories. Human beings needed ways to preserve what they had seen and thought. That is why Mesopotamia still feels close. We also live in a world of records, systems, promises, worries, stories, and attempts to make order from uncertainty. The materials have changed. Our tablets glow instead of drying in the sun. But the basic desire remains. And so, as this long journey through the land between the rivers comes to an end, let the ancient cities grow quiet around you. Let the ziggurats fade into the dark. Let the river move on beneath the moon. You have now drifted through 100 sleepy facts about ancient Mesopotamia. From the first mud brick villages beside the rivers to the great cities of Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria, this was a world built through attention. Attention to water, attention to grain, attention to stars, tablets, walls, contracts, gods, and stories. It was a world of huge monuments, but also of small marks in clay. A worker's ration, a merchant's letter, a student's exercise, a song for a goddess, a king's boast. A question about what dreams might mean. Long after their cities changed, those little marks remained. They waited quietly in the earth until people learned how to read them again. So, as you rest now, imagine the rivers continuing their ancient course through the darkness. Boats are tied at the reeds. A temple lamp burns high above the city. In a house around a courtyard, a family has gone to sleep. On a shelf nearby, a fresh clay tablet is drying in the warm night air. The words upon it are simple, but they will travel farther than anyone in that room could ever imagine. Thank you for listening to History to Fall Asleep. Sleep well and good night.